Hello, everyone. Today I am joined by Peter O'Keefe. Now, thank you for coming. When you texted me, or not texted me, sent me an email. I think it was way back in May,
Yeah, it's been a while.
somewhere
It's
around there.
before my book came out in June,
Yeah, well before. When did your book come out?
June 3rd.
Yeah, okay. So it was not well before, but it was at least a month before. And all you wanted was for me to review it. But I'm like, do you want to come on my show?
Yeah, that's very cool. I'm happy you did.
So, would you mind giving us a brief introduction? Who are you? And
I'm Peter O'Keefe. I'm fairly new to fiction horror writing. This is my Counted with the Dead is my first novel. I've kind of led a very zigzag career and life. I grew up in Detroit. Lived there for basically the first 3 decades of my life. Um, spent had pretty much a wastrel youth, I guess I could say, because it took me 10 years to earn my 4-year art degree,
mm,
um, and at Wayne State in Detroit. And I went to New York. I wrote some plays, had some stage readings, was making art. Um, and then I entered the Writers Guild used to have a fellowship program,
hmm
and I said, "Well, I'll write a script." And I got a book on screenwriting and wrote a script and entered it and was awarded a fellowship.
mm,
Um, that got me an agent, got me a gig on this show called Tales from the Darkside
hmm
back in the day. Um, and then I wrote a script which actually, and this is decades ago now, I'm not going to say how many. I wrote a screenplay, a horror screenplay, that became this book that I just published in June. And it got a lot of attention. It got me a ton of meetings. So I moved to LA. I got some writing assignments. I optioned this script 10 or 12 times over the years. Never got made, never really came close to getting made, but I made a little bit of money on options. And I kind of lived out there for a decade, alternating between writing assignments and working as a word processing temp. So I finally decided I was kind of a square peg in a round hole and returned to the Midwest, first to South Bend, and then to now my wife and I were in Racine, Wisconsin. They're both kind of Rust Belt light, very reminiscent of Detroit, where I
hmm
grew up. And once I left LA, at that point there wasn't a lot going on social media wise. So basically, when you were gone, you were gone.
hmm
So I didn't get any more assignments. I started making my own short films. Um, I started I made a documentary that was awarded an Emmy, not actually a documentary about artists in the Midwest. And yeah, I just kind of bounced around from, variety of jobs, video producer, copywriter, whatever, making a living.
Yeah.
And but the script, Counter with the Dead, just stuck with me. And a couple of years ago, I just sat down and wrote it as a novel, and it just felt right because I was able to go so much deeper into the characters, so much deeper into the world that they existed in Detroit in the late '90s,
hmm
and so it's gotten a good reception from reviewers. Um, I wish it had sold more copies, but I'm still working on that. And
Yeah.
I've sold some short stories, and working on pushing another horror novella and writing another horror novel at the moment, and that's where I'm at now.
What was uh the novel we're talking about is Counted with the Dead.
Hmm.
Um, what was it like tran transcribing it from its script format into the novel? Did you
It
just
was,
like have the story outline basically, and then you
yeah. I
just?
mean, basically, the screenplay became the outline,
Hmm.
where I basically, worked scene by scene through that, and lots of things changed. Whole parts of the story got thrown out, characters got thrown out, characters got added. White characters became black characters became white,
Interesting.
straight
Yeah.
characters became gay, it's just, you know, things changed. And what real, the two things where I was able to really go deeply into their inner consciousness, their thought process, which was great. You can't do that in a screenplay.
Hmm.
And I was able to really go deeply, some people may think too deeply, into the geography and of Detroit, and kind of the world they move through, um, which a screenplay is exterior factory day,
Yeah.
and I was able to go and describe the factory they're in and describe the environment and
Yeah.
how it makes them feel. And
I actually really loved that part of the book, because it felt like the novel had a love-hate relationship with Detroit, and it Detroit very much plays a character in the
oh,
story.
Detroit is the character. I mean, it's kind of, it's like, it's basically a retelling of Frankenstein,
Yes.
but instead of the monster climbing the Alps and hiding in the wilderness, he's in this, what was then a ruined city of blocks of abandoned skyscrapers and factories, which have now, I have to make the point, have now all, almost every structure in my novel that was abandoned at the time I wrote it, or the era that I wrote it in, has now been completely rebuilt,
Yeah.
rehabilitated. So it's been a complete turnaround.
Yeah. That's like I was saying, that part of the novel really impressed me. It had like an otherworldly feel to it. The atmosphere I felt was steeped in dread, and it was like painted in gray and blacks. And it's very visual. You could kind of tell that it might have been a screen. I was going to ask a question about this because it felt like it might have been a screenplay before. Um,
Yeah,
but
and it is a very eerie environment, because when I was in art school in Detroit, I had friends who basically, you know, moved into abandoned skyscrapers
hmm,
and, jury rigged their own power and lived in those places. And that's just a spooky, dark, dangerous world to
yeah,
exist in, and to make art, and I was in a lot of ways trying to recreate that feeling.
it's almost like an apocalyptic Wild West.
Yes, yes.
um, so can you tell us what the story is about before we move on just a little bit, so listeners will have an idea?
Basically, the story centers around a mafia hitman in Detroit who wants to he wants to get out. He's had enough. And his last hit turns out to be the man who has married the hitman's ex, former love of his life. So he's motivated to carry this out. And then for him, that's it. I'm done. And for him, it becomes this very desperate search for absolution, because that was the original idea behind it. The very, very Catholic kind of idea, is how badly can you sin? How badly can you do and still be forgiven? And you kill people and then go to confession and be forgiven? I mean, is that possible?
Yeah.
So he becomes determined. He goes to his priest. His priest says, "No way am I giving you absolution for all the things you've done. You've done nothing to fix it."
Hmm.
And so he goes out into the world to try to fix this. And then, to his horror, his his past life comes back to haunt him in the form of this Frankenstein monster created from the bodies of all his past victims, and using the now deranged brain of his final victim. Um, and so, yeah, so it becomes the hitman hunting the creature, and vice versa, through these, this very dark world of 1990s Detroit.
Yeah, you mentioned, the characters. I really enjoyed the characters because they're not your typical fiction characters. These guys, Jack and his brother Marty, they're fun to watch, but they're not exactly easy to like.
Hmm.
They've
Hmm.
done some bad things, and, you probably wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alleyway. Uh, Yet Jack does have an interesting redemptive journey throughout this book, uh, because of everything else that goes on.
Yeah, and I mean, the original title was Absolution.
Oh,
I
okay,
mean,
yeah.
'cause that's of the screenplay. I mean, it is all about how far bad can you go and still come back?
And maybe
And it's
even
very
how do
dark.
you find redemption when you've gone that far?
Yeah, because it's also, you mentioned the brothers. I had been to a lot of meetings about this script in LA, and to me it was always this horror story, mafia versus hitman versus Frankenstein, and then I met with this one producer who he says, I read this, and to me it's not really a horror story. It's a story about two brothers,
Mhm.
and I had never even thought about that
Yeah.
that's what it was about, and it makes sense because it was written. The screenplay was written at a time when I'm one of 8 siblings,
Mhm.
and the brother closest to me, we both lived in New York City at the time, and at the time I was writing this screenplay, he was dying of AIDS.
Oh, no.
So it was just and I just buried myself in writing this thing
Mhm.
to kind of deal with what was going on around me. Um, and so it became, I guess, subconsciously about two brothers, even
Yeah.
though my brother and I were nothing like Marty and Jack, but that relationship, you know,
Yeah.
kind of wove its way into the story.
Yeah. Did you find yourself exploring, your relationship with your siblings, especially, the one who passed away when you were transforming this into a novel?
In some ways, I mean, his world, he was a gay man, and his world kind of comes into it a little bit
Mhm.
in the Marty character, who's a closeted gay man.
Mhm.
My brother was not closeted, but I certainly knew a lot of men like that, and just the kind of in developing it from the screenplay, the kind of interplay between two brothers, who say things to each other that in any other context might be unforgivable,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
because they're siblings, it's kind of part of their relationship. And in the end, that relationship is the most important thing in the world to them.
Yeah. They even, betray one another, and, uh, after the initial shock and anger of it, there's still forgiveness.
Hmm.
When
Hmm.
if it was anybody else.
Yeah, yeah, no way. Yeah, no
Yeah,
way.
absolutely. I really love their dynamic together. I also love the monster. The monster itself was kinda scary and, well constructed, pun intended.
Yeah. I mean, that was the fun part of turning it into a novel because, there wasn't much room to describe the monster in the screenplay,
Mhm,
but in the novel, you can go not just into his physicality, but into his thought process. And,
mhm,
he's this former guy who was not really a bad guy,
mhm.
but whose brain has become damaged in the process of being, removed from his skull and put into the skull of this beast.
Yeah.
And so that was fun. Yeah, so yeah, I just enjoyed that, and so I remember when the screenplay was being shopped, occasionally a producer would show me, oh, I hired this artist to do their idea of what the monster looks like, and then it would always be, no, it's nothing like that. So this way, I
Yeah,
was able to really, really, envision it the way I saw it.
yeah. What I really liked about him was, how confused he was, and, Um, he's kinda like he kinda reminded me of the original Frankenstein monster. He's delirious, confused, and angry, and he's trying to figure out not only what happened to him, but his place in the world, and, so that was like, that made him terrifying and dangerous, I found, and that was, like, very well done.
Hmm. And also, hopefully, a little bit sympathetic. because
Yeah, absolutely, because he's gone
this
through
was
something
done to
awful,
him,
right?
and in the end, there is some sympathy for him, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed that uh, a lot of old classics get retellings all the time, but I find that Frankenstein retellings, I don't know if there's more. Maybe Dracula holds uh, the championship for this, but I think Frankenstein is very close behind. What do you think it is about Frankenstein stories that that people want to use to retell it?
I think it's just Mary Shelley's vision of this beast. Um, it is so. I mean, it's so captivating. It just could go in so many different directions, and the whole thing of the beast and to me the beast and his creator. That dynamic,
Hmm.
and the whole thing of being a frightening, horrifying creature, but also being lost and
Hmm.
trying to figure out what happened to me. How do I survive in this world? How do I learn to speak to people? And everyone who sees me is horrified at the sight of me.
Hmm.
There's this, it just seems there's so many different ways into the story,
Yeah.
where you can tell it this way, or tell it in the future, or tell it in Detroit in the '90s, or tell it as a female version of Frankenstein. Or, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just so many places you can set it, and so many ways you can look at those characters.
Absolutely. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about the prose because I found it. It's very beautiful prose. It's even like maybe on the dense side, which is fine because if some people they can't do dense prose, but I found you did it very well. Does this come naturally to you, or did you find you had to struggle to get the words just right?
No, I mean, I write kind of the things I like to read,
Hmm.
um, and it's I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to describing a place or a person or an event. So, I'm a very slow writer. I just spend a lot of time honing that down so it's exactly the way I see it in my head, and that sometimes leads to dense prose.
Hmm.
Um, and it was denser, believe me,
Oh yeah.
because the novelist Gabino Iglesias edited the manuscript,
Oh nice. Yeah, I think I
and
saw that. Yeah.
10,000 words of description went out the window. Uh,
Oh.
during, so, because I mean, it was even denser. Um,
That's a good
you
30,
leave
40
me,
pages,
a
right?
free hand, I will, I mean, Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein is incredibly dense.
Yeah.
It's for modern readers, it's hard to read
Hmm.
because it is so, every every little pebble described, and
Yeah,
every sheet
absolutely.
of ice
Yeah.
described in incredible detail. But that's one of the great things about it. But you couldn't do that today.
No.
You could do that today and get published.
No.
So I try to draw the line. I try to my writing's kind of dense, and you know, it's also being kind of set free because my various careers have been as screenwriter and copywriter and video writer, producer, and commercials writer, and things where you had to be very, very, you know,
Keep it going
minimal,
and yeah.
just use as few words as possible.
Yeah.
And I got good at that, but it's not what I wanted to do. I
Yeah.
wanted to really, tell the story the way I want to tell it. And the novel allowed me to do that.
It feels like you have a love for the English language and you like to play around with sentences and words.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's true. I guess I have a love for storytelling, and
Hmm.
words are the tools
Yeah.
to tell those stories. So I really get focused on kind of being a perfectionist.
Hmm.
I spend a lot of time just looking for the right word or the right turn of phrase,
Hmm.
which, like I said, makes me a very slow writer. Um, but I mean, I'm I'm happy. I'm proud of the results, that come out of that.
I have a feeling that you're the type of writer who likes to correct as you go. So you want to get the sentences just the way you want them as you're going, and then you don't continue until you're happy with where you're at.
I do that a lot, and then I do 10 more passes and do it again,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because yeah, people are like, "Oh my God, I did 3 drafts on this thing." And I'm like, "3?" I do 30, just
Yeah.
every time through looking for a better way to say it, a better way to turn that phrase or a better way to describe that scene or that person.
Yeah. Now, were you always a big fan of Frankenstein?
It was it was one of the books that really got me into the genre.
Yeah.
It's the one that has always stuck with me. Yeah, there was something about that story. Um,
Yeah, me too, honestly.
yeah.
I always found that I could identify with the monster.
Hmm. Hmm.
For certain circumstances, and that's one thing that really drew me to it. And I think, although no movies really captured that, the essence of the book, they were able to at least capture that sort of identity crisis, the who am I? Where do I belong? Type feeling.
And you can also identify with the creator of the beast, with
True.
Dr.
Yeah.
Frankenstein,
Yeah.
um, especially if
Especially
you're the
being a
person that
writer.
creates things,
Yeah.
with his kind of arrogance and the unintended consequences of what he's done and
Hmm.
trying to deal with what he's done, and
Very
his
true.
guilt
Yeah.
at what he's done and the way it destroys the people around him. I mean, he's also a great character.
Absolutely, yes. Um, so where did you start with your journey with horror? How far back does it go? When did you start reading or watching horror movies
The
or
the
books?
way I like to tell it is I'm a fallen away Catholic, but
Hmm.
I grew up, in a Detroit parish school, and then Detroit high school, Catholic high school, and it's like in my mind, how can you grow up that way and not become into horror? Um,
Yeah.
in second grade, we had this elderly nun who had the sheet of glass on top of her desk, um, and underneath she had these images of the Christian martyrs,
Hmm.
of being skinned alive,
Oh my God.
being burned,
Yeah.
and the one that always stuck with me was this entire family in ancient Rome, mom, dad, and the kids all have their both hands cut off and are one by one being thrown into a boiling pit of something or other. And I was like, how can you not become a horror writer? You know, you're constantly hearing about the martyrs and their courage under torture and,
Yeah.
horrific
Yeah.
acts. And,
If you had pictures of like Hellraiser or Freddy Krueger on your desk, you'd
yeah,
be
yeah. If you grew up like that, you'd be like,
there's
yeah,
something wrong
let's
with
have
you.
to tell a story. Not to mention, you've got this guy in front of every classroom nailed to a cross, and you're like,
Hmm.
all
Looking
right,
like he's an agony. Yeah.
kind of a dark way to look at the world.
Yeah. Very
But
much
then
so.
I was mainly as a kid into sci-fi, and then I think it's reading Frankenstein, probably I don't know, junior high or something that turned me more from sci-fi. To me, sci-fi was hard because it's always about the future, and I always wanted to write about things that were happening to me now,
Hmm.
in this time and place. And horror was a good way to do that. And then I wrote some horror, and I wrote the original screenplay for Kind of with the Dead, and I had some horror assignments as a screenwriter, and then I made some short films that are horror films, and I made I was way ahead of my time making this web series, Sister Mary Martha's Martyrology, where Sister Mary Martha has a talk show and she interviews the dead Christian martyrs. She's able to bring them on her show, and of course, what could possibly go wrong? Um, and yeah, so it's always kind of been there, but I've never, until I addressed turning the screenplay into a novel, I never really had the time to really dig into it. It was always like, oh, I got to go to work and make videos, make commercials or whatever,
Yeah.
and finally when I had the time to just sit down and write a novel, you know, I was like, God, why didn't I do this so much sooner? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, at least it came, because you could have never approached it, right?
Yeah. And another influence I think is Greek mythology, you
Mhm.
know, all that stuff, all those things about, gods and men and monsters and cyclops and all that sort of thing. I always was fascinated by that.
Yeah.
And
So
the
there's a lot of
first
monsters
thing
in there,
I,
yeah.
the first thing I ever wrote, I was still in art school and I was doing posters for this
Mhm.
dance troupe in Detroit, Clifford Fear's dance troupe, which was a very athletic African American dance troupe, Dunham based, Catherine Dunham type dance. And I was doing the posters, and the Clifford Fears at one point said, "Boy, I wish someone would write a libretto for me that we could do a whole performance." And I'm like, and I was taking some creative writing classes, just for credit. And I said, I'm a writer, and I wrote, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur as a libretto,
Hmm.
which I had to go to the library and see what a libretto was before I could do it. And he loved it. He choreographed it, and it premiered at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And I was like, oh, I like this. I like writing.
Nice.
But nothing went so easily ever again,
No.
or quickly. So,
No, that never happened. Oh, I wouldn't say that never happens, but,
well,
like, have you ever worked on a short story or perhaps a novella or a novel, or it just, like, popped out of you and you're just afterwards, like, that was a great experience?
yeah, I mean, I've actually written some short stories. One I can think of in particular that's kind of a very dark literary kind of story that just, I literally dreamed the story and woke up and wrote it,
Hmm.
and and then sold it as a short story. And it just came,
Yeah,
and that happens so rarely.
yeah. I love it when that happens, honestly. You've worked many jobs in your life, and I have a list here from your webpage. You worked as a night janitor, a postal clerk, loading dock worker, warehouse grunt, and store clerk, among other like what you've already mentioned.
Mhm.
But doing these more blue collared type of work, did you find that's fueled your creativity at all?
It In some ways, the monotony of those jobs would allow your mind to kind of wander, and you'd come up with ideas.
Hmm.
But I think was the main value was the people I met and the
Yeah,
situations I found myself in. Um, those things just were, as a writer, living a life is, I think, is the most important thing to be a
yeah.
writer. I mean, I was 16 years old, um, with my first real job. I'd had other jobs. My first real, you know, clock in and clock out job in a warehouse in downtown Detroit. And that, it was, what an introduction to the real world of Detroit. It was, the entire warehouse crew was black. The entire dock crew was white.
Hmm.
I had a job kind of taking stuff between those two crews. And then at one point, everything exploded into this racial conflict. And just to see that, to experience that, and to have friendships on both sides of that was, that's something I keep coming back to in my writing. And there's an undercurrent of that in kind of With the Dead,
Yeah.
kind of the racial geography of Detroit and the politics and all that stuff.
I have to wonder if that experience didn't influence, and maybe even a large part, your short race memory.
Yeah, that was very much influence. Um, it's a very dark video about cops, basically in a cop bar,
Hmm.
and gender and race play a big part. And that was one of my first roommates when I left home was an ex-Detroit cop. Um, and he was still buddies with all his buddies on the force, and
Hmm.
they would come over and we'd smoke dope, and they always had the best dope, and drink, beer and tequila shots and whatever, and the stories they would tell
Yeah.
and their attitudes. Um, I mean, I really liked my roommate. He was a really good guy, but some of these guys were just frightening.
Yeah.
And the stories they told were frightening, and you just hoped sometimes they were not true. But it was certainly was a lot of material, and a lot of that went into that film, Race Memory.
Yeah, that was really well done. I watched that and I got kind of lost in the whole thing.
Because
Um,
some of the stories, the white, maybe former cop, were actually stories I heard cops tell.
oh, really?
Pretty much almost word for word.
Wow.
So yeah, it was. I think those
That's
are the kind of
it's
things that make you a writer. Just
yeah,
experiencing people like that, and kind of
absolutely.
diving into those worlds, those other worlds that are so different than your own.
Yeah. Now, your bio also mentions that I guess your professional creative writing journey started with writing for George R. Romero's Tales from the Dark Side, which you talked
Mm.
about in your introduction. Now, I'm sure you've been asked this before, but how did you get connected with Romero?
I'm trying to. I never even met him. Um, Tom Arnold was the showrunner, basically.
Like D. Tom Arnold? Like
No, this was another
okay.
Tom Arnold.
Yeah.
And that's when I, right at the same time, I got the Writers Guild Fellowship. I can't remember how I think I might have just cold called him, like, hey, I just got this Writers Guild Fellowship, and because I didn't even have an agent yet. Um, and I went in there and pitched some stories, and they, hired me, and I wrote 3 episodes, and some of them I'm proud of, some of them I'm not so proud of.
Yeah.
It was a good experience pitching because I'm basically, especially in those days, basically a shy person, and
Hmm.
going in and pitching to people was hard. And I would spend a week coming up with all these stories I thought would be perfect for Tom.
Yeah.
And I'd pitch the first one. Nah, we already did that. I pitched the second one. Nah, that's not for us. I pitched the third one. Oh, we're doing that same story next month. And then I'd like make something up out of the top of my head, and he'd go, "Oh, I like that," and I'd have to
Yeah.
go figure out how do I write this story that there's no story there yet.
Yeah.
And so it was good. It was good experience. It was good practice,
And
doing these sort of things.
yeah, so you never got to even talk to George Romero, or was
No, he
he
was. This was. I don't think he was in New York in those days,
okay?
and they were based in New York at that point.
So was he just like had his name on it? Maybe he
Yeah,
was
he
at a
was like
desk and
executive producer.
yeah,
He
okay.
might have directed some episodes. I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the man at the top, and people like Arnold, were the ones that chose the stories, and they hired
Yeah.
all kinds of different directors and all kinds of different writers.
Did you ever get to like check out any of the sets or anything like that?
No, because when I was in New York, they had already started making them in LA.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I wrote my 3 when I lived in New York, and they were being made in LA at the time. And by the time I moved to LA, the show was done. Um, so, yeah.
That must have been a pretty cool experience though, because that was on like primetime TV, right? Did you ever like get excited and sit down and watch your episode?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, of course, told everyone in my family and, and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Because, at that point, Tales from the Dark Side was pretty
Yeah.
well known show. And so that was fun.
I used to watch it all the time.
I love the opening credit sequence of that show.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was fun. It was a good experience. I never really had any other TV experience after that, though.
Yeah.
I kind of went into features, and I wrote a I wrote one television movie for a German network,
Mm-hmm.
which was fun and interesting. Got to go to Munich and have meetings and
Oh,
all that
nice.
stuff. And I I shouldn't even tell this story, but my biggest, you know, wish I could take it back moment of my career was I was doing okay. I was getting all the, various writing assignments, and I got a writing assignment from Imagine Universal, and I just froze. I just froze, complete writer's block. And for months, I've been going in and having meetings with Michael Mann.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he, according to my agent at the time, he just liked, for some reason, he liked me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I was from Detroit. Anyways, and, went to all these meetings. I'd pitch all this stuff, and nothing ever came of it. And then I'm sitting there with writer's block on this Imagine project, and they're calling me, "Where's the draft? Where's the draft?" And my agent calls me, "Oh, Michael Mann wants you to write a TV movie, but it needs to be done like right now."
Oh, man.
And I didn't do it. And I just, I should have, taken drugs or something and tried to do both projects at once. Because then
Yeah.
nothing, I was never able to get another meeting with him after that.
Oh, yeah.
Down. And so it's one of those, man, if I had that to do over again, if I could go back and visit my younger self.
Yeah.
Um,
But you gotta be gentle with yourself too, right? Like
yeah. Oh,
if
yeah.
it's not gonna happen, it's not gonna happen. So I wouldn't. I'm sure you've had time, but I don't. You don't need me saying this, but you shouldn't be so hard on yourself for that,
Oh,
because
yeah. Well,
like
it's that Catholic guilt
yeah,
complex.
yeah.
Even though I'm not a hitman, I'm constantly hard on myself for mistakes I've made.
You feel like a hitman
Yeah,
of your
that's
own
right.
self, right?
I need to find absolution somehow.
Yeah. Now, that's not the short that I mentioned. Race Memory isn't the only one you've done. You've done a bunch of others, but I wanted to talk briefly about Sister Mary Martha's
Martyrology.
Martyrology.
Hmm.
Can you tell us what that's about, and where can if
It,
anyone who wants to watch these videos, they can just go to your website?
yeah, go to my website or go to Vimeo or go to, I think they're on YouTube still. It's been so many years since I've looked at them.
Yeah.
But Vimeo or to my website. And this, I mean, basically, yeah, it's been so long since I made those. I don't even remember the names of the saints, but we shot the first episode trying to make it look like an amateur production.
Hmm.
So we purposely shot it to look really amateurish, and that came back to bite me because everyone's like, "This thing looks terrible. I don't want to watch this thing."
Hmm.
So after that, we got rid of that concept, and she just sits at her desk, and magically these martyrs appear, and she interviews them, and she magically ends up, you know, in their place in some instances being tortured, by a torturer and in a mask, with torture implements and yeah, it's hard to describe. It's hard to describe.
Hmm.
She rescues one saint who was swallowed by a dragon, according to the various martyrologies, and she manages to rescue her from the mouth of this dragon. But then the dragon, someone else has to replace this saint, this martyr that's been freed. And at first it looks like it's going to be Sister Mary Martha, but then it turns out to be this evil priest who's always trying to shut her down, who gets
Hmm.
slurped up. So it's just kind of a wild, crazy, fun look at these crazy martyrology stories. The
Yeah.
Christian martyrs of, the things. This one, they tried every way to kill her and they couldn't kill her. They tried to burn her. They tried to poison her. They tried to kill her with arrows. And finally she got swallowed by a dragon. It's just like, how do how do you not want to, revisit those stories?
Yeah. Are shorts a thing in the past now, or are you still?
Pretty much. I mean, because the time and effort, I mean, if I went, it would certainly be easier now,
Mhm.
because I usually had to rent cameras and lights, and sometimes when I was working as a producer, I could use their equipment, um, and use actors and not actors. And yeah, I mean, the amount of work that went into each one eventually, just got to be too much. I need to just sit down and work at a word processor to tell stories.
Yeah.
It was, and then of course my sister Mary Martha went and got married and started having babies.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah.
although I really wanted to do an episode with her pregnant, but
Yeah.
it just didn't happen. So,
So is it more of a relief now that you can just, like, roll out the computer and start pounding away on the keyboard?
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I if I was younger, I would love to get back into doing that, but now I've got so many stories I want to tell, and the only way I can tell all those stories is writing them. If I go out and try to make them as videos or movies, I'll never even make a dent
Yeah.
in that backlog of stories. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
and
have
you have
you
so much more control when you're writing. I mean, you can
Yeah.
set it anywhere.
You're
You
your
can
own
have any
director.
number of extras.
Yeah.
You don't have to. Although now, if I would never use AI, but I guess people are using AI to do all that stuff. And but I just like looking at the screen and writing the story.
Yeah. I mean, you can be your own director, and you don't
Yeah,
have to worry about the budget for all the explosions you're putting in, and
don't have to worry about actors not showing up or
yeah.
not embracing your vision.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Now, were you always maybe dabbling in short stories or writing novels throughout your life, or did this all come later?
this mostly came later, because I started out after I did that dance for a Minotaur. I started writing plays,
Mhm.
and I had a little bit of success. I got some stage readings in New York and Chicago, um, and then I started writing screenplays, because I got the fellowship. So it always, and then the jobs I would get when I wasn't writing were related to that.
Mhm.
Writing, marketing videos or training videos or commercials or documentaries. So I never really had the kind of the mental space, the bandwidth to do the day job and make short films and think about writing short stories or something. So
Yeah.
so once I decided, you know, this making videos is just too hard, and started writing, just and that's been in the last, I don't know, 5 6 years or so.
Nice.
So
Now, you mentioned AI earl just like a question or two ago, and I was wondering, like, there's a lot of writers, and I think I'm sort of on board with them that are really against AI. What are your feelings about
I
AI?
have it in my contract for Kind of with the Dead, no AI
Mhm.
for covers or anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat you're in. I just it, I don't know, it just taking the human imagination out of this.
Yeah.
Um, to me, my dreams are already AI.
Mhm.
They put together people and scenes and situations from my entire life, and it's like, who needs AI when you can put those kind of stories together on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's
I
a
think
slippery slope.
Yeah, I think
It's-
also you gotta wonder what the intention is. If
yeah,
somebody's gonna have, ChatGPT write their novel for them, what are they looking for? Because when I'm writing a story, um, it can be very frustrating and hard to do, but when it works, there's nothing else like it in the world.
yeah,
And
yeah. It makes it
yeah, yeah,
too easy, and not very good.
yeah,
And that scares me in terms of literature, in terms of publishers, and in terms of movie producers. They don't always care if it's good, you know,
yeah,
as long as it's quick and as long as they get an audience.
mhm,
And once you train people not to expect much from films or not to expect much from novels, you're going to get an awful lot of people that are perfectly happy with AI produced content. That's the part that scares me.
That's
That's
what scares me too, honestly,
why I'm
because
so
I could see
strongly
that
against
happening.
it.
Yeah. I mean, it would be too easy for that to happen. I think there is a readership that wants their stuff created by
Hmm.
humans because you do lose that human connective
Hmm.
tissue, you could say, to watching a movie, what you identify with. If it's written by a robot, then what am I supposed to identify with? Where's the story? Like, is this a robot story or is it a human story?
Yeah, and we talked about my kind of dense style and kind of with the dead, and you're not going to get that with AI. I mean, that's
Yeah.
my particular
Yeah,
approach
exactly.
to
It's your
things,
fingerprint.
and not just pulling descriptions out of off the internet from 100 million different sites to
Yeah,
put together your little mosaic, and
exactly.
having walked through those abandoned buildings, you know
Yeah.
just that experience, that human experience, I don't think it's going to be replicated by AI pulling up photos of old buildings and kind of
Yeah.
manufacturing a scene.
Yeah. Um, and that, you mentioned like them AI pulling from different works of art. That's a whole other can of worms because it's theft and nobody's being credited or paid for that, and that's a
Hmm.
huge issue
Hmm.
as well. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hope I know the Writers Guild has made some progress in that area of their last contract against using AI, and
Yeah.
you know, I think yeah, yeah. I don't even want to go down that path. It's kind of scary.
What do you think of people who use AI just to like assist them, like maybe in writing their book blurbs or helping edit or whatnot, stuff like that?
I haven't given that a lot of thought. It, even because you have a lot of people using AI to write their work emails and that sort of thing, and to me, it gets to the point where your AI generated message is talking to their AI generated message,
Yeah,
and so how is anything getting accomplished? And
that's a very good point. Yeah.
and and usually the best things happen when you're bouncing ideas off each other.
Yeah.
They send you an email about, well, what about trying this? And you're like, oh yeah, I haven't tried that. And
Even
if
when
it's
you're
AI going back and forth, and you're just going to get lazy.
yeah,
And I think that's
even
really
when you're
scary.
halfway through that email, other ideas will come to you
Yep, yep, yeah. It
that
happens all
wouldn't
the
have
time.
otherwise. Yeah.
I'm watching a film or I'm reading a book, and I'm like, oh yeah, that solves that problem I'm having with my scene.
Yeah.
Doing something like that.
Absolutely. Right, so you came to writing short stories and novels fairly late in life, and I'm glad you did because I have a similar sort of story in that I started out early, but then I stopped, and then I started again, and then I had a kid, and I had a complicated job, so I kind of stopped again for about 8 years, and now I'm
Hmm.
back into it, and the road ahead is quite a bit shorter than it was before. So, do you have any advice to writers who are in their 50s and they've always wanted to write a novel and now they kind of have the time? What would you say to them? Like, what would be your advice?
Boy, it's so hard because everyone is different. Everyone's story is different.
Hmm.
Is depending on your writing background. If you don't have a lot of writing in your background, then start taking some courses. And
Hmm.
because I always found, um, it's not true that I didn't write short stories until recently. Because I remember when I took fiction courses in college, you know, it really motivated me from week to week to come up with a little story because it was due. And for those, so I did write some short stories, and I think that's one good way to start is go someplace where you have deadlines and you
Hmm.
have feedback. And if you do have a writerly background, just decide what you want to do and sit down and do it, and try not to do what I do, which is I'm always going in 10 directions at once. Never.
Yeah.
And, it takes me forever to finish something because number one, I'm a perfectionist. Number two, I'm doing eight or nine other things. So yeah, just find a story that you really bought into and just focus on that. And join writers groups. And
Yeah.
because I've really found helpful is I'm a member of bless you, the
Oh,
Horror
thanks.
Writers Association, and I've joined the local chapters. I'm in Wisconsin, halfway between Milwaukee and Chicago, so I've joined both chapters, and so you get to meet other writers who are doing what you're doing, and get some support. And I think just being alone in your room really makes it hard, really makes it difficult if you're
Yeah.
not getting feedback. You don't have some sort of deadline. I mean, some people can work with self-imposed deadlines, but
Yeah, I'm not very good at that.
yeah, and that's why those fiction courses were so good for me. I had to come up with something.
Yeah.
And then, over since then, just I've had so many professional writing jobs where, yeah, you got to have this written in the next hour or by tomorrow or whatever. So you
Yeah.
really, with that kind of experience, you learn how to do self-imposed deadlines and meet them.
Hmm. Now, what are you working on now? Like novel wise, or you mentioned a novella earlier.
Yeah, I have a novella that was also edited by Gabino,
Nice.
which I'm shopping since I don't have an agent. You're limited
Yeah.
to the number of places you can put it out to, but it's also difficult. I like it a lot. I'm really proud of it, but it's very much, like I talked about my background growing up in Detroit. It's very much about that. It's very much about race.
Hmm.
It's a kind of uh, very, very nice white couple who have adopted a black infant, and as a teenager, their teenage black daughter is killed by the police,
Mm.
and their old house that they've always lived in with her, which was always haunted, but it was always kind of like their daughter would always just make them laugh about it. They're like,
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. But now that their daughter's dead, the house is seriously coming after them. And so it's about so it's very much in your face about race. Um, it's a horror movie. It's kind of, I don't know, a little bit like Get Out, in that they can't get out of the house. They don't know why it's trying to kill them. Is it seeking vengeance for what happened to their daughter? Is it seeking vengeance for what's happened for the last 300 years? Or is it something completely unrelated that's
Hmm.
going on? And then the cops get involved, and of course, what could possibly go wrong? And so it's a tight little horror story, haunted house horror story, um, very urban, um, and it's actually so far been to a lot fewer places than Encounter with the Dead, um, and gotten a lot better response. Um, but still, no one's. I mean, it's gotten a lot of, "Oh, I really love this. This needs to be made, but it's not for us," kind of thing,
Oh yeah.
which I didn't get very much with Encounter with the Dead. So that makes me a little bit hopeful. Uh,
Yeah. Keep
and then
shopping it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Keep shopping it.
Yep,
'Cause-
that's all I
yeah.
can do is just
Yeah.
don't give up, and every option I see, and then I'm writing another horror novel, kind of more along the lines of kind of with the dead, kind of a
Okay.
period piece.
Now you mentioned that you've. I want to ask this before we sign off, because I saw it. I forget where I saw it. It might be on your website, but you've worked with Gabino Iglesias. He's edited your work. How did you get connected with him for editing? Did you just like ask him,
It's kind of
or?
a funny story, because I finally got onto Twitter, actually when I started writing fiction and
Hmm.
writing, and I was kind of like, and my stuff is kind of a mix of horror crime,
Hmm.
and and I just wasn't seeing a lot of that out in the world. Like, am I wasting my time? And I started connecting with these, or not so much connecting as following these horror writers. And then I discovered Gabino's work, and I'm like, oh man, he's doing exactly the thing that I want to do, that I'm
Yeah.
trying to do with this novel. And people like Laird Barron, you know, and I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, you can do horror crime. You know, his Isaiah Coleridge
Coleridge.
stories.
Yeah. I love those
Um,
books. I have them
and,
actually all
and
behind me
so, I
here.
mean, so we were friends on Twitter, and you know, um, and I finished my draft of Kind of with the Dead, and it was like looking for someone to edit it. And I posted to a bunch of the people I followed, can you suggest an editor? And I described the project, and you know, it's a paying gig, can't pay a lot, but you know. And Gabino messaged me back and said, hey, I'll edit it for you. And I was
Nice.
like, oh my God, sure. You
Yeah.
know, literally my favorite writer, and he's just volunteered to edit my manuscript. So, and then when I wrote the novella, he edited that, you know.
Nice.
Now I think he's way too busy to do stuff like that.
He might be, yeah. But what's
So,
it like working with him? He seems
and
like such a great guy.
he is, you know, he's I think his sensibility, you know, he's very much like a lot of the people I grew up with and knew in Detroit. He's very progressive, you know, out there, but not a very weak need progressive. He's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. You can get that
And,
just from his fiction.
and pretty much, you know, in terms of his writing, F you if you don't like that I write stuff in Spanish sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that I really appreciated. And I like to think he kind of appreciated some of that in my work. You know, it's just, I'm not writing something that I think is going to be popular. You know, I think while I was working on it, I thought, oh man, I already know this is going to be a tough sell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I mean, it's not like we're buddies or something, but I really, you know, respected his opinions on my work, and he seemed to really like it. He had good things to say. Like I said, you know, I ended up losing 10,000 words with his notes, and I
Yeah.
think that made it a much better
Tighter.
story.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So, final question before we wrap things up here. And I ask this to all my guests now. Are there any authors out there from any genre, it doesn't matter, that you feel not enough people are talking about?
You know, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said that about Gabino,
Hmm.
but now he's taken off. And
Yeah,
another
for sure.
person I would have said that about is who a few months ago, Cynthia Paleo,
Mm,
in Chicago, Forgotten Sisters, and you know, a number of, you know, kind of folk horror, very much where Chicago is very much a character. But now all of a sudden, she's in terms of the horror world, she's everywhere.
yeah, she's starting to blow up too.
Yeah, and you know, there's another writer I like who is not really that visible yet, is Kelso Hurtado,
Hmm.
who's a writer, and I think he's in San Antonio, and he's written a couple books I really like. I'm trying to The Devil's Promise is one of them.
Hmm.
There's I forget if that's the first or the second in a sequence of two related stories, and I think I was turned on to him by Gabino,
Hmm.
and I hesitated at first because I thought his stuff would be young adult because his lead characters are teenagers, but it's not. It's definitely not. And it's also, you know, in a good way, kind of densely written, and the characters are very deeply written.
Nice.
The descriptions. So it's the kind of writing I like to read. It's
Yeah.
the kind of writing I like to write. So I think he's someone that people need to pay more attention to. And And then there's people that I think really like Laird Barron. I wish people would pay more attention to him outside the horror world. I just think
Hmm.
he's such a good writer. He's, you know,
He's one of the best.
yeah. And, then I'm looking at my list here, another one, Andy Davidson, another one who
Andy
I think
Davidson, yeah.
outside of horror should get more attention. And
Have you read The Boatman's Daughter?
yes,
That was
I
very
like
good.
that book a lot. It's got the density of, I think, the urban stories that I like to write, but
Hmm.
it takes place in the bayou.
Yeah.
But it's got that same density,
Yeah.
where you can just see, every tree and every bog, and the characters are so deeply written. So him definitely, and people like Laurel Hightower and Haley
Oh, yes.
Piper are people whose books I really like a lot,
I
and
love both those authors.
and
Yeah.
I think they both should become more mainstream than they are, and probably will. They'll probably follow in the path of Cynthia Playo.
Yeah. Well, Haley Piper, I think, is on her way to that. And Laurel Hightower, I think she's going to.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
like, definitely. It's in her cards, I think. Yeah.
hmm
I
And
mean,
they've
she's a
both got a
phenomenal
lot of
writer.
stuff out there, which
Yeah.
I always hate. Like, how are they writing so much stuff?
Yeah.
I'm like, it takes me forever. So
Yeah. I hear you. All right. So, do you have anything coming out soon that people can look forward to, like short stories or anything like that?
nothing, unfortunately. Yeah, nothing till next spring. I have a short story coming out, and
Nice.
what I can never pronounce that word. The CHT, that creature, the Thula.
Oh,
Uh,
Cthulhu or?
uh, yeah, forget it. But I have a short story coming out next spring in a
Nice.
quarterly, a horror quarterly
Okay.
called
So,
"You Had Me at Hello." It's
okay.
a very Detroit urban story.
So if people want to check you out online, where can they go?
You can go to peterokeefewriter.com.
Nice. And
And
you're on Twitter too?
I'm slowly moving off Twitter. I'm mostly on Blue Sky now,
Okay.
which I don't even know my handle on Blue Sky, but search Peter O'Keefe and you'll find me.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I've taken the plunge too because Twitter's become a bit of a shitstorm, and it seems like it's a sinking ship too. A lot of people are bailing,
yeah,
and
I've seen all these people on Blue Sky that were on Twitter, and
yeah,
yeah, I don't want to get into politics, but I just don't want to support it. I don't want to
yeah,
support that site
me too.
in any way, shape, or form. Um,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for being a guest on my show. I had a great time talking to you.
yeah,
Uh,
likewise. I'm so happy you invited me. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and looking forward to. I hate watching myself, but looking forward to hate watching myself on video. So,
Within the next week or so, this will also become a podcast episode, and I'll try to remember to let you know when that's up. So I want to thank the people who came out to watch. There was some people who did. Mostly they come afterwards. So if you're in the future watching this or listening to it on the podcast, thank you very much for showing up. And you're invited to come back whenever you have a project you want to talk about. Just let me know. Send me
well,
another email, and
hopefully, when that novella gets picked up somewhere, we'll have
yeah,
something to talk about.
we'll do it. All right. Thank
All
you,
right.
Peter, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. Bye bye.
Bye.